Hello? I think we are about ready to get started. Please take a seat, and maybe if you can squeeze in towards the middle, so if anyone comes in late, they can come into the aisle. Welcome, everyone. My name is Fabiola Cordova. I'm an Associate Director for Latin America and the Caribbean here at the National Endowment for Democracy. On behalf of NED's International Forum for Democratic Studies, I'm pleased to welcome everyone to today's presentation, The End of Peru's Success Story, very important question mark, featuring Reagan-Fascell Democracy Fellow Alberto Vergara. Funded by the US Congress, the Reagan-Fascell Democracy Fellows Program hosts some of the world's most dedicated democracy activists, scholars, and journalists to conduct independent research and pursue projects here at NED. Now, in our 17th year, the program has hosted more than 250 fellows from over 90 countries since its founding in 2001. Within this remarkable group, our speaker today stands out for his unwavering commitment to democracy in Peru. Since the departure of autocrat Alberto Fujimori in 2000, Peru has enjoyed strong economic growth as well as a stable democracy. The country has seen 4 peaceful transfers of power since 2001, while the judiciary, legislature, and other democratic institutions have operated with relative independence. A booming economy has accompanied Peru's return to democracy. I'll share a few statistics that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. Between 2001 and 2016, GDP per capita grew an average of 4.2% a year, one of the highest in Latin America. The poverty rate also dropped from 55% in 2001 to 23% in 2014, showing a significant decrease in inequality. These political and economic developments have led some to conclude that Peru was enjoying a golden age of democratic renewal. But there is more that catches the eye. Although the economy has performed exceptionally well and standards of living have improved across the board, Peruvians have low confidence in democratic institutions and low support for democracy in general, compared significantly lower than its peers, its counterparts in the region. This has been referred as the Peruvian paradox. How do we explain this dissatisfaction with the political system in an environment of sustained and robust economic growth? To make things even more interesting, we have the developments of the last 6 months that I'm sure you're all very familiar with, but very quickly, former President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski resigned in March to avert an impeachment vote in the National Assembly. He had survived a prior attempt to impeach him back in December, and this happened because the main opposition party in Congress, Fuerza Popular, broke, and part of the party supported PPK Kuczynski to stay in office. This, of course, resulted as additional details emerged from the Brazilian Odebrecht multinational that had been providing campaign contributions, contracts, and other dealings with Kuczynski. PPK has then, of course, pardoned convicted President Alberto Fujimori. And now we have somewhat a new political scenario when his Vice President Martin Vizcarra has stepped in, taken office to complete his term through 2021. In most countries, including my own, if these successions of events had happened, we would see a lot of political chaos, a lot of instability. However, it is somewhat surprising that it looks like Peruvians have taken this in stride. So the question is this the system working as it's designed to, with an orderly and democratic succession? Or is this revealing a new level of apathy and disenchantment with democracy and the political class? Big questions. We are very fortunate to have Alberto Vergara with us to help us shed light into all these issues. You all have his bio, but I will very briefly introduce our speaker today. Dr. Alberto Vergara is a professor at the Department of Social and Political Sciences at the Universidad del Pacífico in Lima, Peru. He received his PhD from the University of Montreal and was also a postdoctoral researcher at Harvard University. He's been a lecturer and published extensively, including in our very own Journal of Democracy. His most recent book is La danza hostil, Poderes subnacionales y el Estado central en Bolivia y Perú. For those of us on Twitter, you can follow this presentation and contribute to the conversation by using the hashtag NEDEvents, or by following the forum at Think Democracy and the Endowment at Net Democracy. And if you haven't already done so, please silence your cell phones. Finally, let me take this opportunity to thank the many staff members involved in this event, and most especially Research Associate Daniel Samet, who offer vital assistance to the fellowship project and today's presentation. Well, welcome. Very good to have you here.
So thank you very much, Fabiola, for the introduction. It's very kind, and thank you, Ned, for having me this semester as a fellow here. It's been great, and thank you for organizing this. Yeah, so a lot of things have happened, and as you said, each of those developments can be taken from different perspectives. You can see, like, the same time you could say that president resigning in the middle of an attempt of impeachment, and then you can see that's a crisis, but you can also frame it as, the president went out and again, pretty much nothing truly happened. I mean, the very same day that the president resigned, the markets reacted in a actually very positive way. The current national currency got stronger that day, so it's kind of a, on the other hand, it's a sort of calm development for something that, as you said, could be perceived as sort of traumatic event. Has not been so far, I suppose.
And what do you attribute this to? Why isn't this a traumatic event in Peru? Are Peruvians so well equipped to take on?
Well, I suppose that in the case of the Pedro Pablo Kuczynski's government, it was clear that after 20 or 19 months in office, he was already a lame duck, right? He was pretty much a lame duck since quite early in his administration, and I think no one really knew how he would be able to finish his term. It was clear that he was under very aggressive attack all the time from Congress, and politicians from the Congress, and of course most of them from the Fujimorista party. And he had already survived one impeachment. There was a second one coming. He was losing ministers from time to time. So it was a moment where everyone, I think, started to think, well, maybe it's better if he is not in office, because this is not going to work. I mean, there is a sort of stalemate or a situation where Congress and executive are not working properly together. So maybe it's a sort of solution to that problem, even if it's not the one that we would truly like.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes there is a temptation to point all the fingers at Odebrecht and corruption, and that's kind of, that's the root cause of this problem. But I think you're pointing at something that is maybe goes beyond that. I don't know if I know you've written a lot on kind of political party fragmentation and issues of accountability. Can you tell us a little bit more about how kind of this system works in Peru?
Sure, I think I'm sure Odebrecht is just. I would say that it was more part of the atmosphere, and it was at the end an excuse to Fujimorismo to make an impeachment because of his relations with Odebrecht. But they would have found any other reason that they really wanted to impeach him. So Odebrecht was like the good excuse to trigger that, which is. But Odebrecht was it's been more in the atmosphere of the period. I would say that basically the main cause, the root cause, if you want, as you said, for PPK's failing government, I think lies on him. He he was not a I mean, Machiavelli has this idea of the good prince for Machiavelli is the one having both fortuna and virtu, right? Fortune and virtue, right? So the good prince is the one that, in addition to be lucky, he is wise enough to use that luck in his purpose for him. And I truly think that Kuczynski is a politician full of fortuna and no virtue at all. And so he never understood why he won those elections. And I think he governed making all the wrong decisions. I mean, during the 20 months he was in office, I was taught since the very beginning, I was convinced that the best way describing the situation of Kuczynski was this Bob Dylan line, he's not busy being born, he's busy dying. Because it's like he at least three main failures were like he never developed its own legitimacy. He had been elected only basically because he was not the Fujimorismo, right? It was a sort of spontaneous coalition in second round that wanted to prevent that Fujimorismo getting into office. And this was, and no one thought that this would be enabled, that Kuczynski, the rich banker, lobbyist, super elite, global class would defeat Keiko Fujimori. I mean, Keiko Fujimori had 20% of the vote in the first round, and he had just 20. So she needed like 10 additional points, and he needed 30. So it was impossible. It was a bad candidate needing like a bunch of points. But basically, a few weeks before the second round, the runoff, journalists made public that the DEA was investigating for drug trafficking and laundering money the general secretary of the Fujimorismo party. And so suddenly everyone was very worried about the country being caught by this sort of mafia related to drug dealers. And suddenly in 10 days or something like that, there was a full campaign on democracy, anti-corruption, in favor of the rule of law, and Kuczynski was in the right moment, in the right place, and he embodied that pretty much despite of him, more like because of him. And he won by 0.2% the election, and so he needed to build his own legitimacy. He had to prove that he could be the president of democracy, anti-corruption, rule of law, that the citizens had already given him that mandate. But I think he never understood that. Once he took office, he decided to be the old technocrat, detached politician whose main objective was relaunching the economy and making a clear market-oriented government. And so his base, people that had voted for him, immediately started to abandon him in terms of support. And the other reason is that he knew, again, all this was clear. It was clear that he needed that. I mean, for the ones interested in Peru, I suggest to read the piece that Eduardo Dayan and Paula Muñoz published in the Journal of Democracy right after PPK won the presidency. I mean, all these problems were already, they already said that, and there's no surprise. And the other thing was his relation with Congress. As you said, vast majority of Fujimorismo in Congress, so he needed his own legitimacy in order to be able to have some sort of bargaining power, leverage power with Congress. But he didn't understand that. He thought that he would appease, right? He would calm down the Congress by giving them all what they wanted, and basically he never succeeded in taming that Congress. And finally, despite that he had been accused for so long about being a technocrat, banker, out of touch with Peruvian society, and with him and all his entourage coming from the private sector, and they have all these conflict of interest. In spite of all that, he appointed a government in a cabinet that was full of economists coming from the private sector, and that immediately started to have all these sort of conflict of interest. So actually he confirmed all the prejudices that Peruvians had on his election, and I think that really weakened his presidency. He never succeeded in having the Fujimorista support, and at the same time he betrayed his voters from the second round, so he was basically alone. Yeah. So I would say that that's the main part of the explanation.
And maybe turning now to the current president, Vizcarra. You said that Kuczynski was a lame duck president as soon as he took office. Now, what can we expect from the 3+ years that Vizcarra has left in office? Does he have the mandate, the legitimacy to advance even very modest reforms? Or, should we be saying survival is success in a way in this kind of environment?
Well, to be my president, I would refine my, so I think Kuczynski chose to be a lame duck. Okay. Since the very beginning. Vizcarra has no option to then being a lame duck. Though I would say that more than a lame duck, which is some image that we use, especially for presidents in the last year when people stop to following their orders. He's more like the subject of a huge veto player, which is Fujimorismo, that has this clear majority in Congress, and I think he knows that. And can he achieve something of he can achieve. He can achieve a lot of what Keiko Fujimori will allow him to achieve, right? But I don't think that he can really have I suppose the kind of democratic, reformist, institutionalist agenda that we would like to see. I'm not sure we will see that. I'm afraid I'm afraid Vizcarra has, we don't know exactly the content of this, but I'm afraid he has some sort of pact with Fujimorismo in order to be president. Some people think that there is a full content of that pact and they have agreed a lot of stuff, and others think that, well, they agreed just to put him in presidency and now they are going day by day. I would side with that second interpretation. But what I'm sure is that he doesn't have the leverage or the option to really have a democratic agenda of reforms. By the way, today there is a new poll today, and this approval of Vizcarra today so disapproval in 1 month he went up from 19% of disapproval to 44% disapproval in 1 month. So and what is interesting is that what has clearly diminished is the number of citizens that were saying, I don't know about him. I will not give I will not approval or disapprove him. But so I'm thinking about it. So that number has shrunk clearly, and so people have already seen that he's not able to truly govern, right? And so I think he's very weak, and more than weak, he knows that he's there only because Fujimorismo has allowed him to be president.
So let's talk about Fujimorismo. You describe them as kind of the main almost power brokers. They have this veto power. How would you characterize Fuerza Popular? And one of the questions that I often hear is it really a truly democratic party? Does it play within the democratic rules? And looking ahead as the only political party in a way that is somewhat structured, that could compete or be competitive in the next presidential election, like what can we expect from Fuerza Popular?
Well, I suppose that maybe a couple of years ago I would not have answered this question that way, but now I'm truly convinced that Fujimorismo is the main threat to Peruvian democracy. It's the main threat. In these 2 years, let's say, since July 2016, when Kuczynski got into office, they have proved that actually all the fears that the country had on regarding them in terms of corruption, democratic agenda, those fears were true and justified. I mean, they have proved that we were right in defeating Keiko Fujimori twice. I mean, she's been twice in the runoff, and she lost those 2 elections. And I'm convinced that's the case. It's a party that that for many reasons it's playing against institutions and against democracy. And I think what really triggered this new angered machine that we've been seeing of Fujimorismo in these last 2 years is that they were not prepared to lose the 2016 elections. I think that has been a traumatic event for them, and especially for her, for the candidate. And and this is something that in the last 2 years they used to say only behind doors, but now they have gone public on this. They think that the election was stolen to them.
Fuerza Popular thinks that they actually won.
Exactly. Keiko Fujimori thinks that she won the election, but there were some tricky ways to steal the election. They don't have any really solid proof about that. It's sort of myth that they have started to believe, but with real, concrete, and dangerous consequences.
Yeah, of course.
Because once you don't trust the main electoral agencies, when you have like a main player in your democratic game not trusting the institutions, so you have a problem. And that's why they decided to oust Kuczynski no matter what, I think. The other reason why I see more and more worried about this is the Fujimorismo as an umbrella of several particular interests. That particular interests, sometimes illegal, sometimes informal, sometimes legal, but that basically what they do is to buy in a party the way of a way of existing in institutions and a way of protecting their tiny interests, right?
Can you give some examples, maybe?
Yes. So, for example, private universities, bad private universities, not the good ones, but bad private universities that have a super favorable legal framework. They don't want to be regulated. And since couple of years, maybe 3 years, 4 years, there is an effort from the Ministry of Education to regulate them, right? They don't want to be regulated, and they have a powerful lobby in Congress in order to prevent that happens. And so they succeeded in sacking from office 2 ministers of education, and in alliance with evangelicals that are also infiltrated in Fujimorismo. They are not interested in universities, but in preventing that any policy of gender equality gets into schools. So you have like a clear coalition of bad private universities, evangelicals, through Fujimorismo to derail any reform in the education sector. And it's the same for illegal mining, also for some activities where it is clear that money coming from drug trafficking is laundered. They have recently blocked attempts to regulate and supervise the institutions that the cooperativas, they're called, that help to launder that money. So it's a combination of factors that I think this archipelago, Fujimorismo is an archipelago full of small private particular interests, plots against any attempt of doing reforms in the sense of the rule of law and the general interest, and having like the country as a main objective.
And I think you're suggesting that they do this with impunity in a way that they get away with it and they still are reelected, or the institutions are not strong enough to withhold this pressure. You know, what does it tell us about kind of these democratic institutions? Because I think, generally speaking, we think that Peru has made quite a bit of progress in strengthening its like state apparatus, and you talked a lot about technocrats, in having a good like a bureaucracy that protects the state. But I think what you're describing is quite the opposite.
Well, yes, and that's quite recent, because what used to happen is that all this turmoil and disorder, we were used to that in terms of for politics, right? So the world of politics was messy, but the world of the economy, the agencies in charge of the economy, the Ministry of Economy, the SUNAT, who is the tax office, and all that, the central bank, all that was super technocratic and well run and high class and all that, right? What has changed is now not even that, it's run in that professional way. I mean, today there's a new Minister of Economy swearing today. Is the fourth since 2016, which is something new, right? The idea that you don't have some stable bureaucrats or technocrats running these offices, that's new. I mean, the fact that this is like a messy behavior that you would expect in the political realm, not in this manner. So, yeah, so the new, I would say the new development is that some way of bipolar country where the economy was well run and politics was messy. It's so the messy part of the equation is conquering the technocratic side. Yeah.
But then, I guess, what about citizens? Because that's something, I was in Peru in April, and I think you and I discussed this afterwards, and I was just surprised that doesn't seem to be a lot of demand for change or for reforms. I don't know if a certain apathy or disillusionment, or how you can characterize kind of the Peruvian citizen, the average citizen who's looking at all this unfolding and somehow not taking action, or...
Yeah, there is a huge dissatisfaction and distance, especially between the political regime, let's say, and citizenry. And I suppose that's not new. My friend Hillel Seufer has this great book on state formation in Latin America, and he shows how the countries having weak states many times is related that people understand quite soon that the state won't be able to do that much, so they stop having demands regarding that state, and because the state doesn't feel any pressure from citizenry, they don't do much that for them, and so that's a sort of historical self-reinforcing dynamic, and I suppose part of the explanation can go to the long run, but also it's a country where it's not so that would be a sort of cognitive element, right? But there is also this more organizational dimension, if you want. Today the percentage of Peruvians that belong to a union, it's below 2%, right? So it's a totally fragmented society. So it's not only about saying, I should go to the streets and protest. Yeah, but usually you need some sort of institutional framework that aggregates those demands. But this atomized society is kind of hard. So I would say that there is a sort of demand, because you see, for example, in elections, right? But it's just the day of the election, you can see many times people rejecting informality, rejecting the dangers of illegal candidate related to illegal activities. And you can, we could say that we can translate, that's a sort of translation of a demand of a more formal, driven by law country. Mm-hmm. But then the day after the election, they go back to their places. And so it's quite difficult if you don't, when you have this informal, non-organized society, that those demands will. It's very difficult to, if you're thinking in terms, especially of protests or citizens in the street. Peru is a peculiar case where it's very difficult to. It's not like Bolivia, right?
Yeah. No, I wasn't only thinking about protests, but I think that kind of answers. And maybe thinking about this kind of fragmentation and fragmentation both in civil society but in political parties. You do have elections coming up this year. We haven't talked much about that. In October, local, subnational elections, local and regional elections. And oftentimes you see all this fragmentation at play, especially there. What do you expect from this upcoming electoral cycle? Is this kind of an opportunity for some renewal, political renewal, or is it more of the same?
Yeah, I would start with more of the same. This is not new again. The levels of government in Peru have are independent one in the others, right? So national political parties participate in national elections, but then in subnational elections you only have regional governments at the regional level and regional organizations at the regional level and local organizations for the local elections. National political parties, sometimes they are not even able to participate. They are so weak that, if you think about Fujimorismo, which is in the talk, as you said, many times we consider, and maybe it is the strongest party, but out of 25 regional governments, they have 3, and they are like the strongest party, right? So in more comparative terms, that's not a strong party, right? So I suppose what we're going to see in October is again an election where national parties are not able to participate, much less to win subnational offices. The only exception will be, I'm sure, an interesting case of party which is national and subnational, but it's a national party that came from the north, which is Alianza para el Progreso, APP, but I guess they will improve their performance at the subnational level, but otherwise we will see regional movements capturing, being elected to regional offices. I don't think we're going to see any particular change on that. I suppose the interesting thing is to see if Fujimorismo will try to win some offices at the subnational level, or if they will just give up and say, well, it's too hard. We'll see that. But I suppose it's going to be more of the same.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Not very uplifting.
Yeah. Well, at least it's not going to be worse.
So, what are the potential factors of change? What can shake up the system a little bit? Because what you're describing is there's certain monotony and and predictability to the monotony. So, continuous party fragmentation at the subnational level, a dominance of Fuerza Popular at the national level, a weak president. We've had a lot of previous weak presidents. Is there something that could shake up a little bit these different pieces?
Well, I think if Fujimorismo succeeds in what he's doing, that is in trying to upset and trying to infiltrate the state agencies and trying to capture the electoral agencies and all that, that's already shaking a lot for the worst.
Very quietly.
Very quietly, smoothly, and gradually, I think they are going in that direction. They threaten the Attorney General of the country. They will try to control the Constitutional Court. There was, maybe 2 days ago, there was a piece by Ricardo Seda, who is a well-respected journalist, saying how OMPE, which is the institution that organizes elections, is being infiltrated by that guy with a party that is related to Fujimorismo. So there are a lot of hints, a lot of happening in terms of taking gradually state institutions. I think that's the main threat right now, and that is kind of shaking the system. If you want the system until now, in these last 18 years, it's been an open system, kind of weak, but also with actors that were weak, that were not able to overtake the system and control it. I think what is changing is that same open, weak system now has a stronger actor that has discovered that they can actually manipulate and that can at least capture some portions of institutions. So I would say that's but let me say something. Yes, so I said, and I think Fujimorismo is the main threat to democracy in Peru. Yes, sure. But I think equally grave is the fact that there's no one in the political Peruvian landscape protecting democracy. I mean, all the main candidates that you could assimilate to these democratic values, convictions, they are all waiting for the 2021 elections. They all have been said that, if you participate, if you're going to be perceived as another politician in the turmoil, and so don't do anything. Just don't participate, don't say, don't confront. And so it is truly sad that Fujimorismo is winning basically because of the absence of another side protecting democracy. I mean, PPK never intended to do that. Vizcarra seems to be following the same path. And so as dangerous as Fujimorismo, I think, is the fact that because of strategic, opportunistic reasons, the politicians that should lead this defense of democracy do not exist. They are in their places waiting for the 2021 elections, and they don't want to damage their electoral options. Right. So I think that's that's also part of
Yeah.
the threat, that strategic behavior.
Well, a lot on the table, and many of them very provocative. I'm going to open it up to questions now. Please identify yourself, and I think we can maybe take 2 or 3 questions or comments. If you are giving a comment, please make it brief. You're going to have to speak up. Miriam, do you want to go first?
Yeah, Miriam Cornet from the net. Thank you very much, Alberto and Fabiola, for this very interesting presentation. I have a question. What's preventing, say, the non-Fujimoristas to build a strong party to become a relevant player and overcome this very fractured landscape?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. McClintock.
Cynthia McClintock, George Washington University. Following up, so insightful. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Political parties in Peru, and we always talk about fragmentation, and we always want strong political parties. But when we see Fujimorismo, as you said, Keiko runner-up in 2 successive elections, turning 40% of the vote into more than 50% of the seats, in part because they do have a regional distribution. Sometimes the term apparatus Fujimorismo, that apparatus is still around. So why these 2 political parties that do look strong, but we're not too crazy about them, right, as you said?
Okay, well, thank you. And Matt?
Matt Tappel with the National Democratic Institute. Kind of following that same line, Peru regionally seems to be ahead of the game in terms of launching a series of political party reforms, election reforms. They've done the most work, I think, in trying to get more democracy within parties, including regional parties. So I'm wondering what your assessment is of all the efforts that have been done to date and what worked and what didn't. I mean, Peru seems to have really tried to reform their political system, but apparently has not had the success everyone hoped for.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, tackle.
So Miriam asking, what's preventing that non-Fujimorista front? This is related to Cynthia McClintock. Has a new book, a very great book. We're launching that on Monday, and she talks about the system of runoff, countries having runoff. And so I'm advancing a question for you next Monday. But in some way, I think having the system of runoff prevents that. Because everyone thinks that if I get to the runoff, I will be the one defeating Fujimorismo. Because it is clear now that a majority in the country doesn't want Fujimorismo in power. So I think that rule, in some way, it's not, of course, not the only reason, helps to that every single candidate thinks, well, I can take advantage of the anti-Fujimorista mood in the runoff, and I will be the one being elected. So that would be one reason. And then you have it's an ecosystem full of free agents, right? People that have learned in how to live and survive without any political organizations. So the idea of engaging in the super costly effort to create some sort of organization, umbrella, cooperation, I think it's very difficult. They know the rules about the rules to survive are the rules of non-cooperation. So I suppose that combination, it's an institutional and political factors that I suppose help to explain why there's not this anti-Fujimorista front that spontaneously exists in the runoffs, right? And I cannot agree more with Cynthia. I mean, yes, I've defended that long time ago with my colleagues that usually say, you know, the problem in Peru is that we lack of parties and we don't have parties and we don't have parties. Mark Plantner told me the other day, this great sentence, he told me, you know, political scientists are the only human group that really like political parties. and I agree, but my argument was, when I had that discussion was, when you see Peru and the level of fragmentation, informality, and you say, well, we need parties, yeah, but you're thinking about the kind of party that you really dream of, right? Mm-hmm. When I see that, I don't see the social democrat from Sweden emerging from that country, right? So be careful with your wishes, right? And I always thought that I preferred a country with no parties than a country having only one party that is a clear anti-democratic one, right? Because he's going to take advantage of that weakness. So I suppose my fears and my fears in theoretical terms have germinated in some way with the situation in the last 2 years. And about the institutional efforts regarding parties, yeah, I've always been skeptical about the idea that we can really create or even strengthen parties through institutional reforms. My sense is that parties arise because other reasons, basically political and social. And the institutional reforms in Peru, I don't think they created this weakness. They were just innocuous, I would say, regarding the current state of politics. They, as I said, now it's a political system full of free agents, politicians that have learned to survive and have success with no parties. And it's difficult that institutions will be able to create those parties. And in addition to that, some of the institutional reforms, to my, many of those reforms you were asking to very weak parties to do a lot that they were not able or strong enough to do, having like internal elections and having all that. And you were talking about very weak parties, and you decided that, you know, if we ask to them to do a lot of things, they are going to be stronger. And it didn't happen that way. So, yeah, the reforms didn't have the success, of course, but I would not say that they did things worse neither. It's like, right, it was an effort that.
And sorry, just to piggyback on that, are there any other reforms that you think would be helpful to the political party system as a whole? Campaign finance reforms, for example?
I think that if something like a party appears, it will come out of the political competition. At some point, you will realize, well, these Fujimoristas guys are a bit organized, and look all what they are achieving because of they are a bit organized. So maybe it would be a good idea to organize ourselves as well. So I have more hopes in that there is a political dynamic that will shape some sort of organization than really top-down reform or something like that. Where I agree absolutely is that we have to do something in terms of how campaigns are funded. That I think it's critical and crucial. All the candidates for the last 15 years are receiving money from pretty much everywhere and everyone. And so you have like all kind of dirty money getting into politics. And to basically all the parties, I would say, or most of them at least. And in some cases with very explicit alliances. I mean, Fujimorismo had a clear, open alliance with illegal miners from the jungle, that they depredate the jungle, and they said, okay, you're my candidate. I assume we didn't see how much money they gave to this, but and Keiko Fujimori was very explicit in saying that she would not increase regulation against them if she wasn't enough. So you have all these dirty sources that we clearly have to regulate and fight.
Okay, well, great. I'm going to take another round. Yes, CM, Sally, I think.
Hi, I'm Samantha Hay from the Solidarity Center. I guess I don't really share the kind of muted optimism that you both kind of expressed at the beginning about democracy in Peru, because if you look in the last couple of weeks with the gasolinazo, there's massive protests, there's people protesting the Nido de Ratas in Congress. I mean, it seems to me that there's a stalemate, a real stalemate between another kind of lame duck president and a really, really dysfunctional Congress, which you presented. So I wish it were different, but I don't know. I'm a little concerned, or I'm very concerned. My question is really about a political actor that started to organize the disaffected, the masses who haven't been politically active, which was the Frente Amplio, which played a surprisingly kind of successful role in the first round, and typical to the left, has divided and divided, because the left unfortunately always does that. And so my question to you is, because Frente Amplio actually was one of the political parties that held primaries, right? It's a political party that I think was trying to do something different, and there needs to be some real grassroots work with disaffected population. So what kind of prospects are there for a real left in Peruvian politics, given the fact that Frente Amplio is now two parties and probably, is going to be a tough challenge to get prepared for the grassroots organizing that needs to happen before 2021.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Sally, yes.
Sally Clarinet, thank you. Alberto, as a professor, as a teacher, how do you find your students' attitudes and their perceptions of the political landscape? And do you see anything coming along with the new generation in Peru in any way?
Right. We could take one more. Okay, yes, Jessica.
Jessica Ludwig from the Foreign Affairs. And I think I just want to ask the question sort of for the devil's advocate about Fujimorismo, because there is some internal conflict emerging, certainly between Kinji Fujimori and Keiko Fujimori, especially after the Kinji videos, which, for those who don't follow Peru, were pretty instrumental in Kuczynski's resignation. So are the Fujimorista elements, which you've described as a very loose coalition built around alliances, not around a strong platform, are they really as strong and going to stick together as much as we think they are?
Mm-hmm. Great.
Okay, so the Frente Amplio, which is the left in group in Peru, I truly think that ideological questions are not the main prism to see Peruvian politics. I am quite convinced that these more we have to see this more as an ecosystem full of ambitious, lonely politicians surviving in that system, and they can run with one party or another, and and this helps this sense of fragmentation that you have. So if you see all the parties in Peru, so Jessica's question, right? Keiko and Kenji, so Fujimorismo is divided at least in two branches, and if you go the group of the President Kuczynski, they divided in two groups, and then Frente Amplio, for the very first time in 25 years, the left succeeded in having a Congress group in Peru. I mean, this was sort of historic for the left. Since 1990, they hadn't had any left party in Congress, and after 2 weeks, they divided. There's something in the ecosystem that prevents aggregation. I don't know what is that exactly, so basically the party Frente Amplio is no longer a party because what you have, the two factions have separated. One of the factions can run in elections, the one called Tierra y Libertad. The other one has the good candidate, Veronica Mendoza, who obtained 18%, but they don't have party. So they have to find a way to run, and I'm not sure they will find that way. I suppose she will find a way to run as a candidate. But so I think they are basically, I forgot to use that. They are, so mainly they are made out of the same elements that regulate Peruvian politics. I think the ideological part comes after, and so the left. I mean, they have always had chance to. Or I mean, if you see Peruvian elections consistently, you have always at least 25% voting for candidates, options that you can relate some way to the left. I mean, this is something that's clear that the demand side is there. The organization of the supply side is just a mess, and they truly missed an opportunity with Frente Amplio. And they also, if you think, they also missed the opportunity before when in 2010 the left won the municipality of Lima. They had this amazing luck, and they just wasted it. And they have done that the same now in Congress. So I think that supply side of the equation is not working.
Sorry, can I interject briefly on Sam's question? Because the muted optimism, I don't think I was very optimistic. In fact, I quite agree with you that it feels that there is a lot behind this apparent apathy in civil society or in citizens in general, and they don't seem to have a channel to express it. And I worry about that too, because that can easily come out as social protest or some other form that is maybe more disruptive to the system. So I just, I don't know exactly what what I said that may have led you to to the optimism part. But sorry, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not usually accused of optimism.
Yeah,
very often. Sally's question on students' view, that's a great question. I mean, I remember, for example, last year when I was teaching there, and when Kuczynski pardoned Fujimori, who was the president from the 90s in jail because of human rights crimes and because of corruption, he pardoned him. And this triggered protests in the street. And so I asked my students in a private, very good university in the Universidad del Pacífico, what do you think about it? I mean, are you for, are you against the pardoning a guy that received a sentence of 25 years of human rights crimes? And most of them were against. Were against the pardoning Fujimori. But not a single one would put a foot in the street to protest against that. It's like I suppose there are a lot of variables explaining that detachment, but at least the picture would be that. I think in terms of values, in terms of they are much better equipped in democratic terms than my generation or the previous ones. They are more democratic, I would say, than the previous ones in terms of values. But once you have to put those values in motion, I would say it is different from the previous generations. Maybe they were not as democratic in value in terms of the culture, but they were more prone to go to the streets or participate. That would be my impressionistic anecdotal evidence for your question. And Jessica is introducing the Keiko, Kenji, the biblical part of the right, it's the Shakespearean part of the. So these two brothers killing each other in it's like a reality. And yesterday, by the way, Kenji Fujimori was ousted from Congress. Him and three other congressmen that defected from the Fujimorista group. I don't think Fujimorismo is destined to stick together. I honestly think that what has an important asset for Fujimorismo is that is the fact that Keiko Fujimori has never been elected as president. I very much suspect that if she had won an election, she would have been another discredited, rejected president. And this ecosystem of agent-free politicians would migrate to another candidate that can assure them some sort of re-election. So it is the fact that she's always in these polls and that is always kind of predictable that she will be in the runoff, so she's a good candidate to put you in Congress. I think that's what's been the main force dynamic energy that has kept together that party. And now, in addition to that, I think since they have this majority in Congress, they're running the party and the group in Congress in a very vertical, authoritarian, and I would say even fearful way, with really an iron fist on this group of people. For me, one of the most reveladores, important moments of these last months was one congresswoman from Fujimorismo called Yesenia something, Ponce. She was taped saying that Keiko Fujimori didn't want Kuczynski to inaugurate something, a work of infrastructure somewhere, and so she was kind of critical in that tape that had been, of course, recorded without her permission, and you have to see the press conference where she asked forgiveness to Keiko Fujimori because of her actions and what she had said. It's like she's asking. It seems like I don't know, someone asking forgiveness to Kim Jong-un or something like that. It's like mi lideresa Keiko Fujimori, my leader Keiko Fujimori. I will never. And it's this very weird way in which she is clearly full of fear of what they can do with her. If So in addition to that, the strategic behavior, now they have added to this more, I would say, threatening way of treating the congressman of Fujimorismo. So, yeah.
Well, great. I think we have time for one more round if there are any more questions. Yes, Mark? There's no microphone, so you're going to have to speak up.
Mark Plattner, Journal of Democracy. Very interesting presentation, Alberto. I guess I'm thinking about following up on Jessica's question. the general picture you present explains the fragmentation. The exception really is the Fujimoristas, right? And I'm not sure that you've given a convincing explanation as to why it is that they still hold together. Even if they're not a majority, they, what, 45% of the population that they represent. You suggested that ideology wasn't that important in politics, but here's a party that traces itself back to a former dictator. Could you say a little more about why they persist in having the kind of support that they do?
Anybody? Oh, Miriam has a follow-up? Yeah.
This is like the other side of what Mark does. Mark's question and Mark's question. I was a bit puzzled with your answer to Matt's question that you said that you really didn't think that institutional reform can have any impact on parties. However, you stressed very much that the runoff explains the fragmentation of the political system in Peru. And that's an institutional device, very institutional device. I mean, a conclusion of what you said could easily be, well, get rid of the runoff, and that may generate some, different dynamics. So, how do you? I'm a bit confused at the end. To what extent institutions matter or don't matter, and what's the real weight of the runoff or other elements that can explain whether it's the fragmentation of the political system or the apparent unity or elements that put together these similar elements inside the Fujimori.
And I'm going to take one more of my questions too, because I do think that at the very beginning, when we started this conversation, you described a series of mistakes that PPK had made. And I think all of them very legitimate and well justified. But then it seemed to explain like the problem was him. He was the issue. But I think the problem is also maybe the institutional design and the presidency as it is conceived, with like a strong, or maybe I'm posing more that as a question. Is there an issue of institutional design behind the weakness of not only PPK, but also prior presidents that have not been able to get enough popular support, that have had a weak mandate overall? So I don't know, you have a number of of challenges, sure. And you have 5 minutes.
Okay, so yes, if I have to elaborate on Fujimorismo and why it's sticking together in this system where no parties, yes, sure, we need more explanations. I would say it is so the Fujimoris, the sources of this importance, I would say, come from two sources. One is of course, the memories of Fujimori father from the 90s. For an important part of the population, that was a good government, a government that defeated the Shining Path, a government that introduced economic order in a country that was in the brink of collapse, basically, back in 1989, 1990, 1991. A country that had collapsed basically both in economic and political terms. So I think some people really support him and think he was like the greatest president ever, and because he put some order. And for many others, and I think that's crucial, for many others was like a necessary evil. Okay, so even if they are not anti-Fujimorista, they recognize that something good was done in that government. So I think there is a sort of, if you add those two groups, you have an important large part of the citizens as voters that at least do not reject Fujimorismo, right? So that makes you like a competitive candidate every time. So I would say that's the first dimension. The second one is not related to memory, but to the work that Keiko Fujimori has done in trying to organize this party. Again, a weak one if we think in more broader, comparative, large terms. This is not El MAS, this is not El PRI, this is a much weaker party than all that. But still, they have done a work. They try to organize this, and they have steadily improved. I mean, Fujimorismo had 7% of the vote in 2006 in first round. Then they have 20% in 2011. Then they got 40 in 2016. So this is related to a work that Keiko Fujimori has done, which is also very paradoxical because Alberto Fujimori was never interested in having a party. Totally the opposite. He was clearly against a party and having one. He had, because it was an authoritarian government, he had the army for him, the media, and he was a charismatic leader. So who would need that source of problems that would be having a party? So that's the paradoxical ways that the daughter understood that she needed some way of organizing that. And then I think there is the third element, which is more strategical behavior by the other politicians in Peru, thinking, well, she's always a good candidate, she always gets the second round, it's better to keep under this, to stay under this umbrella, even if I'm not a Fujimorista. I mean, I think it's 10 or 12% of the congressmen of this 53% of the Congress, Peruvian Congress. So only 12% of the Fujimoristas congressmen are militants of Fujimorismo.
Party members.
Are what? Are
party
partisans,
members.
Right? They belong to Fujimorismo. Most of them were invited at the last minute, and many of the more prominent ones are pretty new in the party. They used to be in other parties. So those would be the reasons why this is kept together. So Miriam, on institutional reforms, I suppose institutional reforms matter for some stuff and not for others. I would not be a 100% institutionalist. So I tend to believe that, yes, they can change things, but other times they don't, basically because institutional reforms are like meteorites landing in a particular place. If they land in a desert, you will not notice them. If they land in a city, it would be a tragedy, right? So the institutional reform in itself, it's not what creates the outcome. But for example, the runoff, of course, the runoff helps to have this fragmentation of candidates. Doesn't create, but helps to keep it. But at the same time, the runoff, and then I side with Cynthia McClintock, the runoff helps for giving some stability, right? Candidates have to moderate in the second run, and so that helps. So, but the outcome is different. The institution is working for two different things. So it's helping fragmentation, but also is helping more governmentality or the ability to govern. Which is related to Fabiola's question as well on institutions and if institutions matter, if there's something in institutional design. I don't really think that at this moment, for example, many people now are saying, yeah, how can we have this institutional design that has created this situation where Fujimorismo has 55% of the Congress and the president has only 14, right? And so this is a problem of the institutional design that is, yeah, but it's the same institutional design that never gave any similar majority to any other party in the last 25 years. right? So it's more the institutions. I mean, I would say that much to the contrary, the system used to be criticized because was not providing majorities for presidents, right? But now that because of pure political reasons, and basically the political reason is that PPK was so an elite candidate, he got all his votes in Lima, right? Every single vote that he got was pretty much in Lima. And Fujimorismo, instead of that, was more national and had a lot of votes everywhere. So that's the distortion doesn't come from the institutional design, comes from the political moment in combination with this institutional design. But the design was criticized because of not giving presidents majorities or not creating majorities. And now it's criticized because it's creating majorities, right? So, to say that institutions depend on the context and how those sometimes, because of, so there are some institutional design problems, I suppose, yes. But at least in the more referred to political outcomes, I would not think that the main problems are of institutional design. Yeah.
Well, great. I think we have run out of time now, but I think we had a very engaging and wide-ranging discussion. And thank you, everyone, for coming this afternoon and for all your questions. And thank you especially, Alberto. It's been great having you here at NET and great to have this conversation today with you.
Thank you.